All right, so I'm confused. Are we? Okay, so all right, so welcome in everybody. Glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia here today. So we're gonna get ready to get rolling here and have a big time on the show. Obviously, a lot going on. We're talking about Georgia and its win against Vanderbilt. We're talking about the win against and looking ahead to Alabama-Tennessee. And everything else from that. I guess we have a little bit of a restart from a moment ago, so I'm catching up there on all of that. But we are happy and looking forward to a really, really big show. So across all video platforms, happy to have you with us. We'll get ready to get rolling here, get ready to do this. John Stinchcomb stops by. A lot going on, a lot to break down, so let's get ready to do it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So on Saturday night, I didn't sleep very much, and I was trying to figure out, what is this about? And I think the thing that I just kind of kept I guess thinking about, and even yesterday I still had this on my mind, is just how big these next few weeks expect to be for Georgia. I mean, it's really overwhelming to think about after several weeks of you kind of try to have to sort of invent some sort of motivation if you're the team, or you sort of have to invent some sort of motivation if you're the fans, the media. You had to sort of create your own storylines, create your own narratives, and sometimes you have to kind of dig deep to be able to find those. Well, all of a sudden, looking ahead to everything that happens on the other side of this off week for Georgia, with rivalry game against Florida, with obviously, and we're going to get to the Tennessee-Alabama thing here in a moment, but with Tennessee after that, road games where Georgia's going to be tested, all of a sudden now, you don't have to reach very far to find the narrative. All of a sudden now, you don't have to dig very deep to go out there and create games that are going to be incredibly memorable. And that's true for Georgia now throughout the month of November, all the way through on the other side of January. And I don't believe I'll ever forget quite what it was like being in Athens on Saturday evening. It was unlike really probably any experience I've ever had around a game before. Georgia obviously did what it was supposed to do. It went out there and obliterated Vanderbilt 155-0. And yet for almost the entirety of the game, the attention of Georgia fans was on something else that was happening somewhere else. It was on what was happening in Knoxville with Tennessee beating Alabama. We understand why. There was a lot of rich storyline there in that game. Vols hadn't beaten Alabama in seemingly forever. Georgia fans don't like Alabama. That's kind of a new nemesis that's emerged in recent years, and any time to see Alabama lose is always interesting. And, whatever the scenario was, it's obvious that there were a lot of eyeballs happening there between Alabama and Tennessee. And if you were watching at home, not at the game, many of you, and I saw your photos and I saw your social media videos of this, you kind of had the two-screen experience going on. You had the one TV with Georgia Vandy, you had the other TV with Tennessee, Alabama, or if you have the one TV, you're kind of flipping back and forth with the, the channel return button. You were staying pretty focused there on the Alabama-Tennessee game there as well. And when we were doing the show from the UGA bookstore, that's our post-game show that we do, after every game, boy, to see the huge crowd that was there, gathered around watching our show, but also watching this Alabama-Tennessee game. Yeah, there's a photo of it, if you're watching on video, of all the Georgia fans that are there. Up there on the left part of that wall is the Bama-Tennessee game on the screen. And what you heard were these huge roars every time something good would happen for Tennessee. It was pretty obvious, and I don't know if this was just reflective of the room that we were in, or if this was reflective of kind of, DawgNation overall stretched out wherever it might go. But it seemed like on Saturday the opinion was pretty unanimous that the folks wanted to see Alabama lose, even though Tennessee is an opponent for Georgia in the SEC East. On this particular game, it seemed like that the battle lines had been drawn, the allegiances had been kind of agreed upon, and Georgia fans wanted to see Tennessee beat Alabama because as of now, it's Georgia fans still more interested in seeing Alabama lose here. That's still the more interesting outcome. Now, it was also kind of pointed out to me by somebody else, and I think this is kind of true, that there may be a little bit of a division, I should say a generational divide here. This may be one of those things that were for some young Georgia fans, their earliest memory of disappointment for Georgia is going back to the 2017 national championship game. If you're young enough, maybe you don't remember anything before that, or maybe for you it's the 2012 SEC championship game. And if you're young enough, you don't remember anything before that. And some of us Georgia folks who've kind of been around a little longer may have to remind some folks over the course of the next few weeks of exactly how much history there is between Georgia and Tennessee. And while a lot of folks in their 20s really can't even remember a time in which Tennessee was very good, some of us who've been around here for a little bit longer can remember some of that. Some of us who've been around here a little bit longer do have a lot of backstory between Georgia and Tennessee. And over the course of the next few weeks, I think a lot of that's going to come out of the woodworks. But it was just very interesting to see the reaction that you got from a lot of Georgia fans to what went down with Alabama and Tennessee on Saturday. And then I think it's also, interesting to kind of think about what this means from a Georgia perspective, watching Tennessee beat Alabama. First of all, I think it's important for me to give some credit here and admit that I got this very, very wrong. And listen, when you're a loudmouth who screams into a microphone for a living, you're going to get a lot of stuff wrong over the course of time. This is certainly an example of that from me. I thought Alabama would assert itself. I thought Alabama would be Alabama on the road here. And that for a Tennessee team that I've acknowledged is good, and I've been saying they were good even during the offseason, but you heard me say a lot over and over again, not quite good enough yet to do this. Not quite good enough yet to stand up against Nick Saban and Alabama. It's one thing to go on the road and beat LSU. It's another thing to eke out a win against Florida. But actually go toe-to-toe with Alabama and win a game like this is not something yet that I thought that Tennessee was going to be able to do, and they did. And so you got to give credit here to Tennessee for doing more right now than I thought they were capable of doing. And I think you also have to kind of wonder then, okay, well, what does that mean for Georgia-Tennessee coming up in a couple of weeks? If Tennessee was capable of beating Alabama this way, are they now also capable of beating Georgia? And all of a sudden, is Georgia's supremacy in the SEC East now called into question because of what the Vols were able to do on Saturday? I'm going to give a little credit here to the SEC office for a moment. You know, a few years ago, we made a big deal about the fact that the Georgia-Auburn rivalry was moving from November to October, and it seemed at the time like this was a favor to Auburn to kind of get them away from having to play Georgia and Alabama, their two hated rivals, two very good programs, so close to the end of the year that this was kind of a favor to them in regards to that. And yet what we also heard at the time was, well, maybe the league kind of wanted to set up a scenario in the SEC East that was a little bit similar to the scenario in the SEC West, where late in the year you've got Alabama LSU, you've got Alabama Auburn, you've got Egg Bowl, you've got these big divisional rivalry games late in the season that the drama kind of builds towards this. Well, in the SEC East, because so many of the teams in that league have out of conference in-state rivals, that you don't quite have the same thing in the SEC East. And so I think the league has made a concerted effort to try to create that. That's one of the reasons why Georgia-Tennessee has been moved later into the year. And lo and behold, gosh, this is working out almost exactly the way the SEC league office kind of wanted it to. Where all of a sudden now, in November, the most dramatic game of the season looms for Georgia against Tennessee. Kind of how the league office seemed to kind of, I guess, orchestrate all this, to kind of manage all this, to kind of create this, that this plan has seemingly come together. And obviously we're going to have a lot to say about Georgia-Tennessee over the course of the next few weeks and in a couple of more minutes here too. But for as much credit as I want to give to Tennessee, and I do think you have to give them a lot of credit for winning the game, I think if you're Georgia, you do have to suddenly upgrade the level of respect that you have for that program, for what they were able to do on Saturday. With all due respect here, I think the larger story on Saturday is what's going on with Alabama. And this may be why so many Georgia fans in the bookstore, as I said, were cheering openly for Tennessee to beat Alabama. This may be why there seemed to be so much intrigue in this game, because one way or another, there's a little bit of a belief that starts to creep in that Alabama as a program is just sort of slipping. Like, we've seen a lot of firsts under Nick Saban a lot the last couple of years. Up until last season, no former Nick Saban assistant had ever beaten him in a game, and Jimbo Fisher became the first to do that last October. And then you could say, well, Nick Saban's lost to one of his assistants now, but he still beats up on Georgia. He still beats up on his old protege, Kirby Smart. And then that changed, too, last January, that Georgia kind of got its first win against Nick Saban under Kirby Smart. That's another thing that Alabama once sort of had as a claim to fame. that it kind of no longer has. And then on Saturday, you saw them give up 50 points for the first time in the Nick Saban era. And all of a sudden, you just see a lot of things that Alabama used to kind of be able to hold its hat on. All of a sudden, it doesn't quite have those things anymore. And you are kind of left to see what we've kind of warned you about Alabama before. This is a program that's become very reliant on smaller players. The physicality that wants to find the Nick Saban teams, that's at a place like Georgia. Doesn't seem like it's as prevalent as a place like Alabama was. I mean, in previous years, Alabama would have used better defense to maybe take control of this game on Saturday. Alabama would have run the ball more to maybe control the clock and keep Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and this great Tennessee offense off the field. They would have figured out some way to do that. They're just not quite able to do that anymore. And so I think some of the energy that some Georgia fans had about this game on Saturday is they kind of sense, and listen to what I'm saying here and don't miss what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, that's the end of the Alabama dynasty. A lot of folks have kind of said that in the past. It sort of has this, kind of reeks of being a sort of a hot take. That's not what I'm saying here. But the Alabama era is over. The Alabama dynasty may or may not be over. They could still win the national championship this year. But the Alabama era where they're a guarantee to play well in a game like this, that is over. I tweeted this on Saturday. They've lost 3 times since last October. They've won half dozen more of those games by like 1 touchdown or less. This is a team that's playing a lot more close games than it used to and, frankly, losing with a lot more regularity than it once did. The Alabama era where they've got the best offense, they've got the best defense, they've got the best coach, they've got the best recruiting, they've got the best, whatever the current trend is. Right now it's transfer, NIL. The era in which Alabama dominates across the board, that era is clearly over. Tennessee's the best offensive team in the SEC. Georgia's the best defensive team. Alabama's taken a lot of transfers, but Ole Miss seems better at using transfers than Alabama is. Alabama's trying to play the NIL game, but Texas A&M seems better at that too. That there are a lot of boxes to be checked in modern college football, and someone in the SEC does almost everything better than Alabama does it. Alabama collectively is still an excellent program, but its level of full-blown dominance has slipped a bit. And for young Georgia fans who all they can remember is a time in which Alabama has been kind of like the tormentor, the oppressor, the bully in the SEC, that era is over. Alabama's run of excellence may not be over, but the way in which we've defined college football, everybody chasing Alabama, that doesn't seem like it's quite so true anymore. So that might kind of explain why you saw so many Georgia fans celebrating what you saw there on Saturday. And you're left to conclude, okay, well, what does that mean then going forward? What does that mean for Georgia going forward? All of a sudden now, Georgia's going to start measuring itself by things other than just Alabama because, frankly, Georgia's already passed that test. Tennessee got Georgia sloppy seconds on Saturday. Georgia's already beaten Alabama a few months prior to that. Tennessee was simply traveling a path that Georgia had already traveled. That's basically what that was. So now Georgia on November the 5th starts looking ahead to a Tennessee game and trying to do something that Alabama proved incapable of doing. And when you start circling that game, thinking about that date, y'all, I mean, of all the ramifications for what came from Alabama-Tennessee on Saturday, the largest, the most significant might be this. It is quite possible that Georgia's never played a bigger home game than the one that's going to play against Tennessee coming up in a couple of weeks. And I know when you say something like that, it sort of sounds ridiculous. It sort of sounds like the thing that shouldn't be true, that couldn't be true. But I went back and looked at this. In fact, you'll remember, we've talked about this a lot in the days leading up to this game against Alabama and Tennessee, that if Tennessee were to win, what that might mean for the nature of that game. And I talked to, you'll remember this, I said this last week, I talked to Tony Barhart about that and asked Tony, Mr. College Football, one of the great historians who understands so many things about the SEC, kind of what he remembers about sort of previous moments, previous eras. We kind of exchanged some notes on that. I talked to some folks at University of Georgia on Saturday from the sports information staff. Georgia last played a game, matchup of top 5 opponents in Athens in 1983. That was Georgia and Auburn. You have to go back a long time to find a matchup of 2 teams both ranked in the top 5. Prior to that, the most recent example before that was 1942. So 2 teams ranked in the top 5. We haven't seen that very much. And yet if things hold here over the course of the next couple of weeks with both Georgia and Tennessee playing games, this could be a matchup of at least top 4 teams, if not top 3 teams, if not even higher than that when this game is played. And it seems like the intrigue, the interest is only just starting to build. Secondary market already has tickets priced in the several $100 range. Many of you have told me that. I've got plenty of folks who are looking for tickets, and they've kind of told me that there as well, that's how big this game looms, and the result in Knoxville kind of a part of that. In fact, it's so much so that you're almost left to wonder, is Georgia tempted to look ahead past Florida, something I don't believe that's ever been true in my lifetime, to look ahead to what might happen against the Vols? I think the simple answer to that is no, and frankly around here, we're not going to let that be the case. Obviously around here, we believe that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. In this particular case, first and foremost, Georgia's got to take care of Florida before it can do any of that. So we're not going to push the cocktail party to the wayside. But we do acknowledge that it's not the biggest game that Georgia will play this year. In all likelihood, it is that game against Tennessee. And on Saturday, you got the sense that every fan was kind of coming to grips with that the seas of change are kind of moving here in the league just a little bit, that the Alabama era of complete and total dominance has kind of changed, and all of a sudden Georgia might be looking to measure itself against other teams, and that the hashtag go for 2 in 22 doesn't necessarily begin with what happens in December in the SEC championship and then continuing the college football playoff, that Georgia's got some work to do just to get ready for that. 2 weeks in the cocktail party, massive home game against Tennessee after that, tricky road games beyond that, that the tough stretch that we always knew loomed for Georgia now seems tougher and more important than ever. And we know that in practice, Georgia's got a couple of weeks to get ready. We as fans and media, we got a couple of weeks to get our attention sort of built up around this. It is going to be a wild ride for Georgia in the coming days. Frankly, I can't wait for it. I told you I didn't sleep very much on Saturday night. So excited about what is to come next. It is an unbelievably intriguing season playing out, and the number 1 ranked Georgia Bulldogs are right in the middle of all of it. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, we're at Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just really happy to have you with us. And, of course, big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible there as well. Listen, we're kind of in that time. Fall's a little bit of a transition season around here where, hey, some days it's kind of hot, some days it's kind of cold, some days it's sort of hot and cold in the same day, and you're kind of turning on the AC, you're turning on the heat, or whatever you got going on. You also start to see the signs of winter start to formulate a little bit, gets a little windier, a little breezier, things like that, kind of the end of the bugs. Whatever's going on outside, you want to keep it outside. And whatever's going on inside, whether it be your AC, your heat, whatever else, you want to keep that right there on the inside where it's supposed to be there as well. That's why you want a wonderful product like Pella Window and Doors of Georgia, kind of keeping you comfortable on the inside of your house and keeping that nasty stuff on the outside exactly where it's supposed to be. That's what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. That plus, they look great on the outside. Improving your curb appeal is a great way to be a good neighbor in your community. It's a great way to also potentially increase your resale value when you're ready to move on to a new community. That is what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. They are viewed to be the best, and they got great savings for you here right now that you can check out here today. Because between now and Halloween on October 31st, you can get 10% off your entire project at a reduced rate of 6.99% for 120 months. You can get all of that here today. Great savings at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. 10% off your entire project, or as I said before, reduced rate of 6.99% for 120 months as you get all that done. You can go to the Experience Center in Duluth and be able to see that for yourself here today, or you can give them a call, 678-638-1496. That's 678-638-1496. Or you can check them out online at pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That is pellaofga.com/DawgNation, because Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. We're going to get John Stinchcomb here coming up in just a moment. Looking forward to having John here today. I know John will have a lot to say about the victory for Georgia against Vanderbilt, 55-0 shutout, what we saw come out of that game, but also kind of the new landscape here in the SEC where Alabama's not quite as good as some folks would thought they'd be in the preseason. Not out of it yet by any stretch, but not as dominant as they once were. Tennessee's better right now than I thought they would be at this point in time. Knew they were good. They're even better than that. Obviously, that's what it takes to beat Alabama. They showed worthy of that medal there on Saturday, and we'll get more of that from John Stinchcomb coming up here in a moment, too. But before that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. It's assisted today by our friends at AAA, and I want to make a very simple point here just for a moment. That And I want to show you this on the screen here because this from David Pollack is a perfect example of what we've kind of seen a lot of as of late. Now, listen, I got no beef with Pollack. My only reason for showing this is because it's a representative opinion of what a lot of folks have been saying. David Pollack making the case that right now, Tennessee, after having beaten Alabama, ought to be the number one team in the country. Let me show you this from Pollack here on the screen. He says, I don't know how Tennessee would not be the number one team in the country this week. Best win of the season was last night. That's David Pollack. Once again, I got no beef with him. Pollack's opinion is sort of representative of a lot of folks here. So no argument for me in terms of, the validity of David's opinion. I'm just simply showcasing that as a way of pointing out what a lot of folks are saying right here. And listen, there's also this pocket of Georgia fans that are almost like, and I'm not criticizing them either. This is how it looks to my eyes. They're almost like too cool for school. They don't want to be number one. They want Tennessee to be number one so Georgia can take it from them or whatever else. And understanding all that there as well. If I'm making a ballot right now, I have no problem telling you the number one team on my ballot would be the Georgia Bulldogs. And frankly, for me, it's not really close. And if I was going to pick someone else besides Georgia to be number one, for me to be Ohio State, it would not be Tennessee as of yet. And my reason for saying that is because I think what you start to see formulating for Georgia here right now is a little bit of what you also saw last year. And we don't quite yet know if this Georgia defense is going to be as good as what the Georgia defense was a year ago that had 5 first-round picks. There's plenty of reason to believe that it won't be. I understand all of that. We don't quite yet know how this team is going to come together in much the same way the team came together for Georgia a year ago. But we do see some evidence that there are at least some ways in which this Georgia team is starting to look a little bit like last year in the area that matters the most, and this is why I would have them ranked at number one. Right now, Georgia, and let's just use a simple stat that everybody can understand. There's a lot of different stats you can use. Some of these are more complicated, but here's a very simple one. The amount of points you're scoring, the amount of points you're giving up. We all agree that when it comes to college football, the name of the game is finding the end zone. The name of the game is keeping your opponent out of the end zone. That's a pretty easy way of understanding who's doing well and who's not. Well, guess what? For all of the gnashing of teeth and all of the criticism that Georgia finds on the offensive side of the football, here we are after 7 regular season games. Georgia is 10th nationally in points scored per game. 10th nationally. They're in the top 10 nationally of points scored per game. And you'll come back and say, well, yeah, but Ohio State's first and Tennessee is second. And Georgia's about to have to play Tennessee, the second highest scoring team in the country. I get all of that. But the thing that we said a year ago that made Georgia better than everybody else, and we said this during the season, and when the season concluded, I believe we were proven right on this, that it was the complementary brand of football that Georgia was playing. Nobody last year had a better combination of elite offense and elite defense than Georgia did. There were teams that were more elite on offense, but those teams were far worse defensively. There were teams that were close to Georgia on defense, but those teams were nowhere near close to what Georgia was also doing on the offensive side of the ball there as well. Because let's flip the page here. I just told you, Georgia 10th in scoring offense, but those teams that are better at scoring, like, say, Tennessee and Ohio State, they are far worse defensively. Ohio State is in the top 10 in both categories. They're 10th in defensive points allowed. But Tennessee, in that same metric, is 47th right now. Now, this is not me telling you that Georgia is going to easily beat Tennessee. I'm not ready to make a prediction on that game yet. What I am telling you is that the thing that made Georgia special last year, its complementary brand of football, scoring a bunch of points, not giving very much up on that defensive side of the ball, that's also starting to kind of rear up and show itself here this year too. And you say, well, how come you would rank them over Ohio State then if Ohio State's also top 10 in both categories? Because once again, it comes down to kind of, as David Pollack mentioned, who's got the most impressive win? Well, I'm not quite so sure Tennessee, using 16 Alabama penalties, blowing a big lead, coming back to finally get the win in a game that featured very little defense whatsoever. Is that really more impressive than beating the team currently ranked number 10, which is what Oregon is, 49-3 at the beginning of the season? And for Ohio State, whose signature win right now is a closer than it should have been win against a Notre Dame team that just lost to a Stanford team that came into the game at 1-4. That's what we've seen from Ohio State thus far this year. But we've seen Georgia on the stage that mattered most against a team now currently ranked. They're ranked the top 10 right now, Oregon is. Georgia beat them 49-3. So we don't quite yet know how the season's going to conclude, but the idea that somehow Georgia is not solid, that Georgia's slipping, that Georgia's less than it was a year ago, you'd be very hard-pressed to find examples of that. Very few stats actually point to that being the case. Top 10 in scoring offense, second in scoring defense, dominant win against a team currently ranked in the top 10. Yeah, Tennessee is going to get some attention right now, and deservedly so. Ohio State seems to be playing better football right now than it did a year ago. They're going to get some attention, and maybe deservedly so. We're going to find out more about them as they play tougher games here coming up. But there's no doubt, for me right now, this is a Georgia team that is rock solid. Number one for a reason. If I had to vote to give in this category, I'd give it to UGA and offer no apologies for it. This, to me, right now looks like the best team in the country. It'll be tested by Tennessee here in a couple of weeks, but the right team, I believe, is ranked number one right now. That is Run the Doghouse, and it's assisted today by our friends at AAA. And, of course, as you travel around and do all the things that we're doing this time of year, and we are doing a lot, going to high school games and college games and everything else, we love having that AAA membership card right there in our pocket to help keep us safe and taken care of as we're doing all that we're doing. And AAA can also provide so much more protection for you than just that. It's more than just roadside assistance. How about a name to know when it comes to insurance products there as well? Because when it comes to getting your AAA auto insurance through AAA, you can expect to get something more from that. And you might even get a chance to pay less for that there as well. You can get a free, no-obligation quote from our friends at AAA to see if you qualify for the AAA membership discount, another great incentive that comes to you for getting your insurance through AAA. It's a paperless discount, pay-in-full discount, multiple car savings, and so many other discount options available to you that you might qualify for through our friends at AAA. So you can call 833-718-2075. That's 833-718-2075 to find a branch near you. Great to have AAA delivering around the doghouse to us here today. All right, let's jump in here and get it going. Obviously, a lot to kind of get into with Georgia getting a win against Vanderbilt and an incredible landscape kind of emerging around Georgia with Tennessee rising, Alabama maybe falling just a bit, and kind of everything else in between. Let's see if we can cover all of those bases as we welcome in John Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So, John, I promise we'll get to Georgia Vanderbilt here in a moment. Georgia wins 55-0, and maybe to Georgia's credit, the fact that the game was, I guess, so drama-free, an example of the dominance that Georgia showed. But I have to find out before we get to that what you thought of that Tennessee-Alabama game and the ramifications you see for this, for Georgia. Let me start on the Tennessee side where they do what I didn't think they were going to be able to do. They got that win. They, dialed up an even more impressive version of offense than what we've seen from Alabama certainly this year, if not the last couple of years. They're drawing some comparisons right now to what LSU did in 2019. What did you think of this Vols team, which, by the way, looms for Georgia here in a couple of weeks? What did you think of them getting the win they got against Alabama?
Yeah, I think it was a super impressive win. I think it showed that they are about a year ahead of where most people had projected. I think with the level of recruiting that they've done in these past couple of years and what they're slated to do this upcoming year, it's a program that's on the rise that I think everyone was expecting them to, be a part of the conversation, but most likely that was coming next year. So what Coach Heupel has done over there and the amount of improvement that the organization has held is rather impressive because they were an afterthought. It was a program that 20 years ago was very relevant, and they went through their struggles. And to see them now having earned a top 3 ranking, it's impressive. And you have to beat the best to be the best. And what they proved on Saturday is given the opportunity, and that opportunity comes with 16 penalties and a missed field goal with only seconds left on the clock from your opponent, that they can take advantage of that opportunity. So I think they have earned their way to it. It wasn't a flawless game by any means, and I think what they showed offensively is that they're very capable of winning the big game, which they did on Saturday. But there's still, if you're making comparisons, there's no other team that I would trade to wear the red and black, because Georgia still, in my mind, is that number one team in the country.
So last year, Georgia blew out Tennessee in Knoxville, and this year it feels like the complexion of this game is going to be a little bit different, or is it? I mean, how much did the win for Tennessee against Alabama now make you believe that Tennessee is a threat here in about 3 weeks' time to come into Athens and also beat Georgia? Georgia's kind of had a stranglehold on the SEC East. We call it Own the East around here. The only time they haven't won the East since 2017 was the pandemic year of 2020. Is Tennessee now a viable threat to take that from Georgia here this season based on what you saw on Saturday?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are most certainly a threat. I still think Georgia's the best team in the country. And when you say that, I think some fans just assume that you're going to blow everyone out. That doesn't happen. It's rare when you're able to beat like you've mentioned already in this show, a top 10 team 49-3 in week one. It's much more competitive. Just because it's competitive doesn't mean you're not better. And I think that's what the reality is Tennessee is a good team. They're a really good team. But Georgia is still better. And I fully expect Georgia to win. Now, the thing is, rather than expectations, you have to go out there and prove it. And there is a month of football coming up for Georgia where they can do just that. There's going to be some good competition for them that is going to either show that they're the best team in the country or show that maybe they haven't or aren't living up to the billing that I feel up to this point they've earned. And, you got a game against Florida, expected to win. Tennessee's the game that everyone has circled at this point as to the landscape nationally of what it's going to look like, but obviously has major implications on representation for the SEC championship. And you follow that back up with Mississippi State and Kentucky. So 4 great weeks of football for Georgia fans to kind of know exactly what we have, and what I think we have is the best team in the country.
Do you agree with me that, listen, and we were in the bookstore on Saturday, UGA bookstore, the eruption when Alabama lost was huge, even though practically speaking, a division team like Tennessee losing would seem to benefit Georgia more, yet emotionally it was kind of a unanimous decision that folks wanted to see Alabama lose. And what somebody told me there that night is that when you look around in that UGA bookstore, the folks who were really cheering the loudest, this was young Georgia fans. This was Georgia fan who maybe his earliest memory of disappointment was the 2017 national championship, as hard as that is to believe, or slightly older, you remember the 2012 SEC championship. And that for a certain generation of fan, they don't know college football prior to Nick Saban being in Alabama, and all they kind of know is Nick Saban kind of being the bull of the woods here in this league, and what a nemesis and tormentor he's been while doing that. John, I truly believe over the course of these next 3 weeks, and I promise you we're not going to overlook Florida, but let's talk about the game at hand right now, which is the Vols. Over these next few weeks, some of us who got a little gray in our hair, who kind of been around here for a minute, we may have to kind of step up and assert ourselves. We have to be like the old man at the family reunion here and kind of reminding folks about what's what. Because, John, when you came to Georgia, and I know you know this, when you came to Georgia beating Tennessee, the idea of doing that was a huge deal. One of the most heartbreaking games I can ever remember as a fan, which I guess predates your arrival, but I guess your brother would have played in this game if I'm remembering the timeline right. That 98 game when the Vols came in here, first time game day had ever been here. And Georgia had just won at LSU, and then the disappointment kind of related to a lot of that for a lot of us, we remember when the Tennessee game was a very big deal. Well, guess what? One way or another, it's a big deal again. Is it the biggest game of all time? We can debate that, but we can certainly say this: it's a big deal now, like it was when you first showed up on campus.
Yes, and quite honestly, I think it's good. I think that's a good thing, because it certainly hasn't been that way. It's almost been an embarrassment of ease in comparison, SEC East to West, in that everybody's talked about you got Alabama and Texas A&M and LSU on the West, and then Georgia has had very little competition. Not exactly upset about that, but Tennessee and Florida haven't held up their end of the bargain of having equal representation on our side of the conference. And now Tennessee is proving that the SEC East is probably a little heavier at the top than the West is currently. Obviously, Texas A&M underperforming this year factors into that equation, and LSU and Florida are equally in comparison to where they've been historically average. But Tennessee, I do remember that era of Peyton Manning and T. Martin and Phil Fulmer, and it was a true rivalry, and that's been lost for a long time. And I think Coach Heupel's done a great job, and the way they're recruiting and with their collectives and the way that is factoring into the college football landscape, it doesn't seem like they're going anywhere anytime soon. With that said, they're still the little brother in the conference, and Georgia has to maintain and assert themselves in a few weeks here when Tennessee does come to town and show that although they are improved, they're still a top dog in the country, and they're wearing red and black. Now, for the fans that are cheering when Alabama loses, I compare it to kind of that New England Tom Brady era where you're either a New England fan or you want to see the Patriots lose just because of their dominance. And I think Alabama has earned that. I think in the college landscape, there has not been a team as dominant as Alabama has. And when you see them lose, you're going, wow, there are chinks in the armor, and there's more opportunity there for us. So I certainly understand it. I wasn't heartbroken to see them lose, and I think it only builds the excitement for this next month of football for Georgia.
All right, very quickly before we get to what Georgia did on Saturday, I got to ask you this. I said this a moment ago. The worst hot take ever is the Alabama dynasty's over. People have said that before, and it's kind of been proven to be premature. What I said very specifically a moment ago, though, is look, the Alabama dynasty may or may not be over. They could still win the national championship this season. They're still alive for that, obviously, and it's not obvious that they won't eventually win it. They're still very much in the mix. But, John, I do believe the Alabama era is over. The era in which they got the best offense, they got the best defense, they got the best coach, they got the best recruits, they got the best whatever the hot trend is. Right now it's transfers, NIL, things like that. They got the best across the board. John, that's just not true anymore. They're still an excellent program, but they've lost 3 times in what is almost like 53 weeks, like a full calendar year plus a week. They've lost 3 times. And over that same span, they've played 5 or 6 games, touchdown or less. They're winning close games more frequently than they used to. They're sure as heck losing more games than they used to. The sort of era of Alabama across the board being the only measuring stick for a team like Georgia, and the kind of beyond the imagination to be that good standard in the SEC, that's just not quite what it is anymore, John.
Yeah, I'd say that the gap has shrunk. I think that Alabama used to dominate in every category, and I was listening to you before, and I agree that now in each individual category, they may not have their name at the top of that list, but they're still up there. So to think that the era is over, I probably disagree a little bit, but they certainly are not nearly as dominant. You don't see that separation that we saw for years, and that gap has closed, and Georgia has led the way in it, and probably, in my opinion, has surpassed it based on a national championship last year and where we stand this year. So that king of the hill that has been for the better part of a decade is no longer. I can agree on that sentiment to say that, and I think this is what you're expressing, to say that they're not still a very good team that's still in the discussion. That's inaccurate, and I'm not saying that's the point that you're making.
Sure.
They are just not as dominant as they have been. It seemed like every category they were the standard in which everyone was shooting for, and now, as you went through it, you look at where they stand, it's not nearly as dominant as they once were. And so I think that is accurate. And it's taken different teams to kind of chip away at that. But Alabama has proved in the past couple of weeks that they were vulnerable. I mean, You look and they almost lost 2 weeks ago, and really had a chance to win against Tennessee this past Saturday, if not for some serious self-inflicted wounds with the number of penalties that they had and that missed field goal late in the game. So it would have been a much different conversation had it not been, an overturned interception in the end zone that they returned to Tennessee's almost, 30?
Yeah.
That the very next play, Tennessee throws a touchdown. That's a game-changing back-to-back series of events. And then, you miss that field goal late in the game to give Tennessee hope to move the ball down the field and have their own chance at a game-winning field goal with only seconds left on the clock. So, that's the way football goes. In those big games, you have to cash in on those moments. And Alabama, shot themselves multiple times and prevented themselves from coming away from a really hard-fought, SEC instant classic game. So still one of those teams that is about as dangerous as anyone in this country. Anytime you have Bryce Young on your roster, you got to feel good that you can come back or pull away in certain situations, because that guy's just super special, and they've got a number of special players, but they certainly don't have the dominance that they once did, and they've seemed to prove that week in and week out for these past 2 or 3 weeks.
So let's talk about Georgia here for a moment. And, John, I think the sharp contrast that Georgia drew on Saturday to the other teams, I think it's meaningful. And people say, well, it was just Vanderbilt. Well, Vanderbilt's also won 3 times already this year, and Vanderbilt's scoring like 30 whatever points a game. The fact that Georgia beat them 55-0, they beat them 100-something to nothing over the course of the last couple of years. John, this just sort of is what Georgia is. Like, oh, so dramatic. Alabama-Tennessee is this unbelievable game. I mean, even me, I'm like a diehard Georgia guy, and I'm like so into what they're doing in Knoxville. I have to admit, I was very into the drama there at Alabama and Tennessee. But also I understand that part of what demonstrates Georgia's strength is how undramatic a lot of its games are. How boring, I use that air quotes around boring, but how boring a lot of the Georgia games are. The fact that Georgia just goes out there and, from the word go on Saturday, just rendered this an uncompetitive affair. Vanderbilt clearly was looking for a place to fall. Georgia gladly gave it one. And when it's all said and done, yeah, you can talk about what Darnell Washington did. You can talk about, a few, storylines from the game. But there really wasn't a lot to obsess over. There really wasn't a lot to nitpick. There really wasn't a lot to diagnose, break down from Georgia's win against Vanderbilt. Georgia is just ruthlessly efficient at times. They haven't been that in every single game, but in that kind of final tune-up before what's about to be a wild gauntlet here over the course of the last few weeks, or in the upcoming few weeks, I'm not quite so sure that Georgia could have showed you much more than it did going into that game on Saturday. They made it look exactly as easy as they were supposed to. What did you think of Georgia's game in particular?
Yeah, I think they continue to prove who they are. And we used to have a special teams coach saying, confirm the validity of the statement. and the statement is, this is the best team. It's the best defense, best offense combination in the country. And what they did against Vandy was made up-and-coming, hungry team that is not, they're not great, but they're a good team. And they handled their business about as efficiently as you could ask. I think a lot of the concern for Georgia has been, the run game and how will that complement things. And we don't have that feature back, and we do have some developmental guys up front that have higher ceilings, but aren't the stalwarts that we're used to with first-round draft pick after first-round draft pick coming out of that front. And what they showed against Vandy is a propensity to continue to generate plays offensively and suffocate defensively. If you look at, the couple of games where it was closer than fans liked, Missouri and Kent State specifically, our defense was put in some pretty precarious situations just because of early turnovers. And that's what led to the different dynamics of the game against Missouri. And, despite winning by, 3+ scores against Kent State, it was largely due to early turnovers. turnovers and Kent State feeling like they had some life, not due to defensive play. So, in my opinion, the early defensive performance has exceeded what expectations should have realistically been. And as they grew and gained more experience throughout this year, they're doing that while also dominating opponents' offenses early and often and frequently. So this team it's just, that's their identity. They don't play down to the standard of their opponents. They've continued to get better, which is needed. I mean, it's a young team, as many guys as they've lost, transfer portal, and obviously to the draft, but yet have performed week in and week out. In this past game against Vandy, I think they checked just about every box that you could ask for heading into a bye week, other than staying healthy. There's some concerns there, just specifically with wide receivers. As we get guys back, you can't continue to lose them, and I'm not sure the extent of Ladd's injury, but
yeah,
that certainly wasn't anything positive for Georgia to see yet another wide receiver go down and head into the tent.
No, that's certainly true, John. I appreciate your evaluation. So much good insight from you on all of that. Thanks for being here, a part of this today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. I love our conversations each week, and I really get the sense that the next few weeks are going to be incredibly fascinating. So we're going to lean on you for a lot here, and so we appreciate you sharing your thoughts. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Hey, it's always a good time, B.A. There's just one last thing.
Please.
I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout-out to, there's a couple players that always seem to pique your interest as the games go on and the season plays itself out. And I remember talking about Devontae Wyatt 2 years ago as a guy you're like, man, he's really coming on. And I think the same should be said about Warren Brinson.
Yeah.
He's shown those flashes where you're going, golly, he's affecting the run game. He's got some tackles for loss. And even when he doesn't get home in the pass game, he's provided that presence. So yet another guy who has been a part of the system for a long time, and now that he's getting more opportunities, is starting to really show what he's capable of. And it was exciting to see, and just wanted to be sure to mention his name given the opportunity.
Boy, John, that's good stuff. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Always a good time. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, to follow what John's saying there, 55-0, so dominant, really kind of rendering the game kind of a non-entity in a lot of ways. The only thing I'm not seeing from Georgia enough right now, at one point in time we have had pretty big, I think, concerns about the running game. I thought the last couple of weeks Georgia's probably answered some of those pretty well. They need more pass rush. And on Saturday, you don't want to mess around maybe and do more than you have to, because Vanderbilt just wasn't a factor to able to compete with you at all. But when you think about what you're going to need for what's still coming, you do need more of that. Maybe if you're looking for the one thing you didn't see in 55-0, really getting after A.J. Swan is maybe something that Georgia didn't quite do a ton of on Saturday, and you do need more of that eventually. So if you want to have a nitpick, if you want to have a box that maybe went unchecked in that game against the Commodores, that might be what that is. We got more thoughts around the SEC here coming up. But before that, though, great time to remind you that we're cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and cruising with all of you coming up in April on board Independence of the Seas. I continue to hear from a lot of dog fans like, BA, I'm going to be there. I am there. Got my stateroom booked, ready to go. Contact your friend Jessica Slater to get all that done. And I got to tell you, it's going to be a great time. I'm very, very excited about it. And I'm excited because I'm always looking forward to a cruise vacation. Y'all know I love taking them. But I'm also excited about this one in particular because I'm going to be with so many of you, and I do truly believe we're going to have a really good time. I've said before that our Dog Nation cruise is a little bit like Dog Nation summer camp in some ways, in that we kind of go off, we relax, we kind of let our hair down. It's sort of on the other side of the season. It kind of turns into what we hope is another great celebration. But it's just, we're pretty far removed from the grind of college football when we're on the ship. Now, it is NFL draft week, so we're still covering that. We're still having some fun with that. Big draft party is a big part of what we'll do in addition to all the great things that you already do on board the Independence of the Seas. So, from that standpoint, it's kind of part of the schedule that we have, but it's far removed. It's post G-Day. It's a time to just sort of get in there, relax, and have a good time. And I just can't wait to have all of you with us for it. So we'll be more relaxed at that point than we are at any other time of the year. It'll be more time to spend together than we kind of sometimes have when it comes to some of these, events that we do where it's a couple of hours, then we're kind of on to the next thing, and you're busy with your own life, and you're on to your next thing. This is just a few days in the ship to just sort of be casual and relax and, work on our tans and, have a little extra drink at the cocktail party or something along those lines. This is what it all is. Our friend Jessica Slater going to help you book it up. She's the travel agent specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to get this done. She's made a website, royaldogs.com. You can go to it, royaldogs.com, and you can find out more about our DawgNation cruise. You can also call Jessica, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. And you can get all your questions answered and go ahead and get that stateroom booked to be with us on board Independence of the Seas this April for that DawgNation cruise. My understanding is that $100 onboard credit is still active, so a great incentive to get signed up on that right now, too. All right, so let's go cruise around the SEC here for a moment. And one of our great commenters, his name is Bryce Dixon, was on our post-game show on Saturday, and he brought up a really interesting point that I don't know that I'd fully considered going into that game in Knoxville on Saturday of what the playoff implications could be for all of this. We saw last year for the second time 2 SEC teams make the college football playoff. So that's the kind of thing that has happened with regularity. I think most of us would have said coming into this year we expected 2 SEC teams to be in the playoff again. But with Tennessee's win, I think you have to open the door to the possibility that at least 3 SEC teams have to be in the discussion. I've also seen some pockets of the internet where they're talking about 4 teams making it. I guess Ole Miss would be the 4th in that case. But I think that you have to very realistically talk about 3 SEC teams making the college football playoff if the playoff committee is in any way interested in making kind of a qualitative assessment of who the teams are. In other words, truly picking the 4 best and not just counting wins and losses and things like that. Let me explain what I mean by this. So Tennessee's still going to be a point spread underdog coming into Athens in a few weeks. It's a tough game for Georgia, as you would expect that it would be, but Tennessee will be expected to lose in that game. But what if it's close? What if Georgia beats Tennessee in kind of a similar fashion to the way in which Tennessee beat Alabama? Maybe not quite so many points, but down to the wire, intense. And then at that point, Georgia kind of sets itself up to win the SEC East. When the season's done, you got Tennessee standing here and saying, hey, we're 11-1. Our only game was our only loss was at the reigning national champs who were going there back to college football playoff. Why should we be eliminated from this discussion? And frankly, I think that Tennessee might have a pretty good argument there in that case. Let's say that Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship, because while I think it's pretty clear that Alabama has slipped some, they haven't slipped so much, they're not still a national championship contender. Of course they are. This loss on Saturday doesn't really change that. It was on the road, intense environment. Bryce Young just back from injury. I'm not ready to eliminate Bama from the postseason conversation just because they lost. They could still beat Georgia in the SEC championship. After all, they did that a year ago. So if Georgia beats Tennessee in November, Bama beats Georgia in December, couldn't you pretty easily talk about both Bama, Tennessee, and Georgia making the college football playoff? And there's a lot to play out before you even get to that point, but it's at least a consideration. I'll also say this. Another one of the results from Saturday I was pretty surprised by, and I don't mind telling you when I get it wrong. I expected a lot more from Penn State than we got. Michigan really made a statement at home in how convincingly it beat up on Penn State. So all of a sudden now, we've seen multiple SEC teams make the playoff. I do at least think you have to consider the possibility that multiple Big Ten teams make the playoff. I was talking about this as an idea a year ago, probably a year too soon, but I think it's very real right now. I think for the most part, the Big 12 is pretty close to being eliminated from playoff discussion. TCU's still undefeated. They're meaningless to me, though. A lot of folks try to talk up Texas. Texas barely beat Iowa State on Saturday. The Pac-12, I think, wants to keep a team alive, but eventually they'll all fall by the wayside, too. So for me, the real playoff race, 3 teams from the SEC, 2 teams from the Big Ten, and probably Clemson. That's your race right now. And by the way, you want to make the Georgia-Tennessee game bigger? Don't forget, playoff rankings for the first time come out the week of the Georgia-Tennessee game. So if you want to add a little bit more pizzazz to what's going to happen there in Athens when these 2 teams get together, the fact that the playoff ranking could possibly rank them 1 and 2 going into that game or at least top 3, top 4, the kind of ranking matchup we've never seen in Sanford Stadium before. That is obviously out there, and that is obviously a very real possibility. I saw where Alabama linebacker Henry To'oTo'o said, it's okay about losing to Tennessee. We're going to get them again. We're going to get a chance to play them again, essentially assuming that Tennessee was going to win the East now. Alabama's going to win the West, which is not – this is not a rubber stamp. Let me start with that part of this. That To'oTo'o's assumption that they're going to have a rematch here coming up, that's not a rubber stamp from the standpoint that – we have already seen Bama fail to win the SEC West in 2019, fail to win the SEC West in 2017. That if you want to go back and look over the course of the last 5 seasons, they've failed to win their division more frequently than Georgia's failed to win its division. So it's not like Alabama always wins the SEC West. We've got a couple of examples in recent years in which they didn't. So with Alabama already having a loss, facing the likes of Mississippi State this Saturday, Ole Miss still on the way too, you at least got to consider the possibility that Alabama won't win its division, and maybe a team like Ole Miss, who's never won the SEC West. I believe they are one of, 4 teams that are currently in the SEC that have not won a division? Ole Miss, A&M, Kentucky, Vanderbilt. I believe it's those 4. Ole Miss, they're undefeated still. They have a chance to do that. So To'oTo'o needs to take care of his own business before he starts talking about rematches with Tennessee. But obviously some Georgia fans had kind of noticed that To'oTo'o said that. And I'm also going to follow up on this just for a minute, too. I know John was kind of mentioning this. So to me, talk about business for a second. You've maybe heard it said before that, hey, if you're a business and you're in competition, the goal is to kind of not compete with your rivals. It's to dominate your rivals. And that just seems like sort of a blowhardy thing. And, of course that's the case, whatever. But actually, I think it's important to understand that in life, whether it be a business or a sports team or anything else, that domination is achieved through definition. And this is what kind of Alabama sort of has going against it right now, is that Georgia is dominating its market by closely defining what its market is. Georgia, I believe, is the most physical team in the country. They're the best defensive team in the country. That used to be true of Alabama, and now that's true of Georgia. Georgia is not the best offensive team in the country. They don't get the best offensive recruits. They don't perform the best offensively. But no one performs better defensively. No one has a better pipeline for defensive recruits. That's the definition that Georgia has drawn for itself. That's the boundaries it's kind of drawn around its market, and Georgia dominates that market. Right now, Tennessee looks like the best offensive program in the SEC. Josh Heupel's a better play caller than Bill O'Brien is. Right now, Tennessee's got better wide receivers, and they've defined their market. They're nowhere near as good defensively as Georgia is, the same way that Georgia isn't quite as good offensively as Tennessee is. These are 2 teams that have created different definitions of their market, and they are dominating their own version of the market in a way that Alabama is having a hard time keeping pace with. I mentioned before, Ole Miss has kind of defined its market as, hey, we're going to be the stop for transfers. No one's going to be better at acquiring transfers and utilizing transfers than us. That's the market they're dominating right now. And if you're Alabama, you're kind of left to conclude, okay, well, with everybody kind of dominating certain factors of the market, certain facets of the market, where's our market domination right now? We're good at this, we're good at that, but we used to dominate everything. That's why when I say the Alabama era is over, I don't mean the dynasty. They may win the national championship this year, but they are not across the board as dominant in any category as they used to be. Different programs have sort of picked a category and said, the Alabama physicality they used to have, we're going to have that. That's what Georgia says. The Alabama high-powered offense we've seen in recent years, we're going to be even more of that. We're going to be that on steroids. That's what Tennessee sort of said. Other teams have kind of sort of stolen other facets of the modern game and kind of chosen to dominate that market. And for Alabama, you're kind of left to wonder, okay, with all those folks kind of taking a bite out of us in a lot of different directions, all of a sudden that is really how the mighty fall. That really is how legacies slip. And right now, Bama would appear to have slipped at least a little bit, worth considering that. And then finally, one more thing here. There was something that happened on Saturday that I'm very much in favor of. So you saw the great celebration when it was all said and done, the fans running onto the field and all that kind of stuff. But the other thing that you may not be aware of is that in the stadium, I'm told that the Tennessee folks played Dixieland Delight, the song from Alabama, which is kind of a big part of Alabama's in-stadium atmosphere. It's just been a big thing they've done there for a while. They make it really vulgar and profane, but it's like a thing that Alabama's kind of always done. Well, Tennessee kind of took that back on Saturday night. I got to tell you something. I am very much in favor of this. And we saw this with like Georgia-Auburn a couple of weeks ago. So in 2007, when Georgia played Auburn, you had the blackout game. It was like, one of the all-time great nights in Sanford Stadium history. It was also kind of defined by the Soulja Boy song. Is it Crank That? Is that what it's called? Crank That, Soulja Boy. And, Gary Danielson and Vern Lundquist were dancing to it. Obviously, all the Georgia fans were dancing. The players were dancing. And so that kind of became the indelible image of that 2007 game was the Soulja Boy song. So when Auburn, in one of the rare wins it's gotten against Georgia in the last 2 decades, when it beat Georgia in 2017 in November, as a way of mocking Georgia, they tried to take Soulja Boy back from Georgia and play that song there at Jordan-Hare Stadium. And that was, Auburn fans thought that was hilarious. Well, guess what? This past 2 Saturdays ago when Georgia beat Auburn, Crank That, Soulja Boy started playing again. It's almost like Soulja Boy has kind of become the Georgia-Auburn version, like the old Oak and Bucket or one of these like rivalry things that you play for, that the winner of the game gets to play Soulja Boy. And I kind of like that. Georgia kind of also stole Swag Surfin' from Auburn. That was kind of one of their cool songs their students like to dance to, and Georgia cranked that up a couple of Saturdays ago there as well. So various teams kind of trying to steal each other's songs and sort of take that as kind of a bounty for winning. Tennessee doing that with Dixieland Delight on Saturday. I got no problem with that. I don't mind that at all. I think that's kind of part of the fun in the SEC, and we saw that with Georgia Auburn too, and I thought that was kind of fun when they did that there as well. So we will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And one note kind of away from Georgia's shutout win against Vanderbilt and all the other stuff in the weekend. Dogs did get a commitment there on Saturday. 2024 quarterback Ryan Puglisi. Now, this was not unexpected news. Puglisi had seemingly been trending to Georgia for the last few weeks. He was taking a very high-profile visit to Georgia this weekend. We talked to Jeff Sintel about this on Friday. If you missed Friday's show, you can go back and hear some thoughts from Jeff on Puglisi. And the part that's interesting to me on this is, and there you see a nice edit of Puglisi looking good there, committing to Georgia. The part that's interesting to me on this is the fact that Georgia seems to really like Puglisi a lot. I mean, the word is out on this, that this was their guy in 2024. Now, at one point in time, I think we would all say that the one big name that Georgia was really chasing was Dylan Raiola. And Raiola eventually committed to Ohio State, and so after that, you started saying, well, is it Julian Sayin, or is it Jaden Davis, or is it something like that? It's pretty obvious kind of post-Raiola that Georgia had really zeroed in on Puglisi. Now, I'm left to wonder, was this the only quarterback they're going to sign in 2024? If you sign another one, all of a sudden you sort of add to your program depth maybe a bit. But it's very interesting the degree to which that Puglisi really seemed to impress Georgia when he came to visit here. He's also impressed other programs too. He's got a pretty robust offer list, some big names on that to go along with UGA. So this is a little bit of from a recruiting ranking standpoint, a lesser recruit than we've typically seen Georgia go after. Obviously, guys like Gunnar Stockton, Brock Vandegrift were the elite of the elite in terms of how they were rated as a recruit. Puglisi, not quite in that same category, but this is a guy that apparently Georgia really, really likes. They've certainly gotten the word out on that. Plenty of insiders have kind of told that to you. Jeff Sintel talked to us about that there on Friday. So a little bit of an unorthodox backstory here, playing his ball in Connecticut. Not a hotbed for high school football necessarily, from Massachusetts originally. That's not typically a place that Georgia goes for its quarterback recruits, but they like Ryan Puglisi a lot. So when you start thinking about Georgia in that 2024 cycle, Puglisi a part of that. We'll see if he's the only quarterback they sign there in that cycle, but pretty clearly this is a guy they have circled for now as a name they are very interested in. They rolled out the red carpet for him, and Puglisi saw all he needed to see. So a little bit of a recruiting note to wrap things up here today. And as you might imagine, Golden Shoe today themed around the big game that's looming for Georgia here in a few weeks. Now, I promise you this. I said this off the top of the program. We are not going to allow the look ahead past Florida. You better believe we're going to, over the course of the next 2 weeks, really get you dialed in on being a Gator hater and being in Jacksonville for the cocktail party. I promise you that. But in the aftermath of what happened on Saturday, this is definitely on Georgia fans' minds. So I'll show you this as it relates for our Golden Shoe today. Kind of the meme you've seen before. Chase Dog shares this to me. Tennessee flexing on everyone after beating Alabama, and you see Jason Momoa coming behind the dog, sneaking up on Tennessee, who's feeling really good about itself right now. Kind of a popular meme being utilized by Chase there. That's pretty clever. Good stuff indeed. We'll make that our Golden Shoe winner for today. Lousy, stinking Gators. They've got nothing to celebrate. How about 5,030 days? They've won a national title. I love that, and I love this. knowing the cocktail party is now just a very small number, 12 days away. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. By the way, click that QR code right there on your screen if you're watching on video, and you can go to DawgNation.com and see the DawgNation store. It's DawgNation.store, the Lousy Stinking Gator shirt, Eddie the Blind Squirrel, that shirt, the original Gator Hater shirt, all of that in the DawgNation store. So you can check that out and get that. And, boy, you talk about fun stuff. I know a lot of you have loved the Lousy Stinking Gators. You've wanted an Eddie shirt for years. It's all there now, and the original Gator Hater is back there, too. All right. So let's dive in here and on video and get your comments. I'm going to start on YouTube today and have some fun over there, and we'll just kind of see what everybody has on their mind. Big win for Georgia against Vanderbilt. Big stretch of games here coming up, and we'll do all of that. Mike D gives the and on video. We are indeed. John Wilson says that Tennessee couldn't beat Alabama again. It is interesting that after having the big lead that Alabama still had a great shot to win that game, and at one point you sort of thought they were going to win it. So, maybe not quite a thorough domination for Tennessee in winning, and obviously helped by a lot of Alabama penalties, and of course Bama fans blaming the refs because they must always blame something when they lose. But boy, plenty of stuff to kind of unpack from that game. Jonathan Aaron says, I know Bryce Young was not 100%, but the real question is, did they have any wide receivers out? I mean, everybody knows that's the only reason Alabama ever loses, which is very funny. Very funny. Paul Moon on Raiola coming in after C.J. Stroud. Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that Georgia would have really liked to have had Dylan Raiola. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And it just didn't work out. And so you move on to what's next. And I think that the story around Georgia has kind of now pivoted back to the quarterbacks who are on the roster. Obviously Carson Beck looked very good in playing on Saturday. You think he sets up to be a very formidable foe in a competition to be next year's starting quarterback. But I also believe that Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton are going to be heard from in a very big way too. That right now the quarterbacks Georgia currently has are seemingly more important than anybody that's coming into the program. And I'll be very honest about this. I was thinking about this. So when Georgia lost out on Justice Haynes, I was really disappointed. I've thought about that in some form or fashion a lot since then. I asked Jeff about Justice on Friday, had my eyes on what was going on between Buford and Mill Creek on Friday night. I have thought a lot about Justice Haynes since Georgia didn't get him. But conversely, we were on our way to the Braves game there that day when Georgia didn't get Arch Manning this summer. And I got to tell you something. We made a big deal about Manning. We obviously contributed to the Manning hype. I don't deny that at all. Those receipts are still out there and readily accessible. I hadn't thought about Arch Manning one time since Georgia hasn't gotten him. I really haven't. And I don't know what that means. Maybe that's revisionist history because, as I said, there are plenty of recruits that when Georgia doesn't get them, I think about them forever. Boy, I'd love to have had that guy. I haven't thought about Arch Manning not one time. Once he committed to Texas, it literally was just kind of over and done for me. And maybe he'll be happy there. Maybe, he'll go on to great success there. I don't know. I'm just saying for me personally, I haven't lost 1 minute of sleep about that recruiting battle. And I just think that's kind of an indication of what I'm sort of talking about here. That the most interesting quarterback names for Georgia right now are not Manning or even Raiola, who I would have loved to have had, because Raiola, I believe, is a big-time prospect. But the most interesting quarterback names for Georgia are Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton. If things go well for Georgia, it may be several years before Georgia needs a starting quarterback that's not currently on its roster. That's just kind of the way that might play out. And if Georgia does sign 2 quarterbacks in 2024, frankly, I think more teams more often ought to sign 2 QBs. Mac Jones, let's not forget that, was a part of a 2 quarterback class for Alabama at one point in time. And he went on to have great success. That if you can get a Raiola, you get him. And if you can't get a Raiola, then get 2 guys and hope that one of them turns out to be really good. Now, maybe Georgia does that. Maybe they don't. Maybe they'll solely focus on Puglisi. Maybe they like him enough to do that. But not signing a QB in 23 would, because right now I don't think they're going to, would at least maybe make you think they might be more, kind of interested in doing that. But I think as a strategy, double quarterback classes when you don't have a Dylan Raiola level prospect, probably not a bad idea. B.Ace Cardigan says, can't believe Saban didn't make adjustments to stop 11. One wide receiver getting 5 touchdowns, what I did on Saturday, is mind-blowing. Yeah, this is just not the Alabama team that it used to be. It's just not. It's just not. Jay Shipe says, I get it now. You're a salesman at heart. Jimbo sold himself as a legit college football coach for $10 million a year. Legend. Is that why you respect him so much? Maybe that is, Jay. Maybe that is. And listen, Jay and I go back and forth all the time. Jay's a great commenter. But I told you, if I get it really wrong, I got to own it. I got the Bama-Tennessee wrong. Got to own that. I got Penn State, Michigan wrong. Got to own that. And right now, Jay, who's been a long time believer in what Lane Kiffin's building at Ole Miss, me more so a believer in what Jimbo Fisher was building at Texas A&M. Right now, Jay looks like the big winner in all of that. James F. says Georgia's going to be better next year than they are this year. Maybe so. Maybe so. DMart42 says we're still here. Yeah, we're still here. We're still here. Green Soldier brings up what I think is a really important point. He says, whoever dictates the pace of the Georgia-Tennessee game wins. Love where our running game is, and it's growing. I agree with Green Soldier on that, and that's one of the things that I was really surprised with Alabama. I thought that Alabama would come out and assert itself defensively, make this game be more about its defense, find a way to win, 38-24, something like that. And they just couldn't. They just couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. Like, Tennessee got exactly the game that it wants to. Tennessee wants to beat you 52-49 because they're not good defensively. Now, they're better defensively than they have a right to be because they don't have very much in the way of numbers over there. But they're not good defensively. Like, if they're going to win a big game, they got to win it 50-40, something along those lines. And Alabama just can't assert itself enough. I mean, the game is played at Tennessee's pace. And right now, that's not Alabama's pace anymore. Bryce Young is a great quarterback, but there isn't a great wide receiver on that roster. And Bill O'Brien is not the offensive mind that Josh Heupel is. He's just not. Every Alabama fan will be the first to tell you that, too. That this is not Steve Sarkisian calling plays for Alabama anymore. It's not. Somebody mentioned the laptop. Yeah, so my laptop this morning, I really don't – like, it's been kind of a little bit finicky the last few days. In fact, we were going to do a live video for Puglisi yesterday, and my laptop wasn't working. I just thought it was like user error, but something's wrong with my laptop. So the show is a little bit different today because of that, or at least my workflow is a little bit different. Yeah, so I'm doing off the phone today. Laptop's not working. I have pretty much every file that I've ever created still on the laptop. I'm guessing it's probably somewhat related to that. Every video I make, every audio clip I make, every graphic I make, they're all just on the computer. So I'm guessing that may have something to do with why it's not working, but it ain't working. It ain't working. Let's see what else on Facebook here. Greg Childer says, I've seen the Braves lose in the playoffs a lot in my life, but this year was the absolute worst playoff series. Yeah, Greg, it was not good. It was not. And, you know, I don't know. I was hoping for more from Ronald Acuna in these playoffs because he didn't get the chance to really contribute to last year's World Series team. And listen, I love Acuna. He's my son's favorite player. He's the most entertaining player the Braves have had in a long time. But I would have liked to have seen Acuna assert himself more in these playoffs than he has. Let's see what else. This is a great comment. Alex Lundeen says, I took my two boys, age 8 and 6, to their first Georgia game on Saturday. When Baba O'Reilly, which is the song that Georgia plays right before pregame, came on, the speakers, watching them do some barking, brought some tears to my eyes. Happy dog dad moment, go Dogs. It is such a great feeling. It is so great. And my family went with me to the game on Saturday. Now, I don't get to sit with my family during the game, and so I don't get a chance to experience that feeling. But there is just something about sharing this with family. I mean, it's the story of my life. It really is. That, you know, I don't really know where I would have been had my, you know, grandfather and dad not really introduced me to Georgia football the way they did. Because, listen, you know, I'm like a lot of people. Like, you know, sometimes growing up just sort of hard. That I don't know, school just don't always go the way you want it to. Your sports that you play, sometimes they don't always go the way you want it to. Like, just sometimes just things are hard, right? And so when you have this pastime to occupy your time, when you are secure knowing, hey, at least my family loves me enough to take me to these Georgia games. You know what I'm saying? Like when you have this thing, and listen, to your sons, I mean, how cool is it for their dad to be taking them to see number 1 Georgia play? My grandfather and dad were taking me to see number 16 Georgia play. You know what I'm saying? Like, Georgia was good, but Georgia was not great in the era in which I was growing up going to these games. But I mean, I just latched on to it as my thing. I mean, obviously it's what I do for a living now, and I clearly wouldn't be doing this now if not for what they did for me then. But like, the experience of being a fan is really about who you share it with. And the older I get, the more I realize that. Like, it used to be that I kind of looked back on my life growing up and kind of remembered the game for whether or not Georgia won it or lost it. And now when I look back on those sort of previous moments for Georgia football, I think about it for like who I was with at the time, because the people I was with then are not with me now. And so, yeah, that's really what it's all about. And honestly, that's kind of the stuff that, I think about even now too. It's like, I was in Indianapolis when Georgia won the national championship. My family wasn't there, but they were like calling me like right as that game was coming to an end. I remember stepping to the back of the press box and, having that moment with them on the phone, or, like 5 o'clock in the morning sitting around with like Connor and Jeff and some of the Dog Nation guys that we were just kind of reminiscing what we'd seen, kind of bumping into some of the families leaving the stadium, and some of those moments with Georgia fans there in that time, and people that I knew, people that I sort of just met for the first time. And I mean, that is really what it is. And so to a dad who finds a way to give his sons that opportunity, I'm proud for you, man. I love that. That is really, really, really good stuff. Really good stuff. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a minute. Get some comments over here. And it's going to take me a second to load all this up because naturally. All right, so over here at DawgNation.com for a minute. We'll do some more comments. Come on. It's moving a little slow right now. I apologize for that. Let me just try YouTube for a second. I'll come back up here in a minute. Let's see what else. John Wilson says Gator Hater Week. Yeah, it's here. It's here. It's Gator Hater 2 weeks, and we're going to spend all 2 weeks getting fully ready for all of it. We really are. JJ says about Ohio State, keep in mind Paris Johnson Jr. is a first-round draft pick at offensive line. So, like, I'm not going to say a lot of bad things about Ohio State. I would say the closest thing to a criticism I have of Ohio State is as of right now, we still don't know how good they are. But it's pretty obvious that Ohio State, I believe, has improved this year over last year. And JJ's pointing out something important here. Like, Ohio State has made a concerted effort to get better defensively. That's what hiring, bringing over a new defensive coordinator was all about. That pretty clearly they've taken that step towards getting better defensively. But they're also better along the offensive line than they used to be too. And some of that's just raw talent. But I also think they have made a concerted effort to get better there. Y'all, I said this all last year. I think people thought I was just being a blowhard. Ohio State knew it wasn't physical enough. Ohio State knew it wasn't physical enough. They've made big steps over the course of this most recent offseason to get better defensively, to get better along the offensive line. They don't want to be pillow soft the way that Alabama was on Saturday. They don't want to be that. They got pushed around by Michigan last year. And yeah, that was in the snow, and it was freezing cold and on the road, and I get all of that. But Ohio State lost a playoff spot last year because it couldn't match Michigan's manhood. And they don't want that to happen to them again. So they are better along the offensive line. They are better defensively. And C.J. Stroud may win the Heisman Trophy, and yeah, they got great wide receivers like they always do, but they are trying to be a more complete football team. Last year, there were 2 teams kind of top 10 offensive and defensive efficiency. It was Georgia, it was Alabama. Well, this year, Ohio State's kind of in that category too. They're trying to be explosive offensively while being as good defensively as they can. And when you play games like Penn State, which they have coming up, Michigan to end the season, I think demonstrating a little bit more defensive prowess is clearly something Ohio State wants to do. And I think this is a program that also wants to kind of redefine itself as an offensive line program again, something that I don't know has always been true about them in recent years. What else? Memphis Dog said, would B.A. unemployed if not for his family taking him to Georgia games? There's a very good chance I would, Memphis Dog, and I'm not even kidding. There's a very good chance I would. I'm not even kidding. There comes some of those bots into the YouTube comment section again, and some of y'all's search history is getting you in trouble again. Caleb Williams predicts that Georgia beats Florida by 40. Buddy Lee Z says two-part questions. Do you feel like we're in the playoffs, in playoff mode as of today? Also, do you feel like Dan Jackson will earn a scholarship? I certainly hope that's the case for Dan Jackson, that he gets a chance to do that. I think that he's pretty clearly deserving of one. I do know that some of this just kind of comes down to raw numbers. And listen, I don't have any knowledge of this. But I would also say in the modern age in which we live, there are a lot of different ways to compensate people beyond just scholarship. It could be that Dan Jackson's getting some sort of compensation some other way. Now, listen, paying for school is expensive, so if he's getting his full school paid for through some other means, then good for him because that's expensive. But so if Dan Jackson isn't a traditional scholarship player the way you think of, that doesn't mean that he's not being taken care of. I don't know if he is or he isn't. I really don't. But it's at least worth considering that there may be some sort of newfangled way to show some love to Mr. Jackson. That's at least a possibility. And as far as your question about is Georgia in playoff mode as of today, I think they're pretty darn close. And I thought that Saturday was an indicator for me. Remember, some of you care about point spread, some of you don't. We hadn't seen Georgia cover a 38-point spread at home in its last 9 tries, not since 2014. So Georgia went out there on Saturday as a huge favor and won by even more than the experts thought they were supposed to. We hadn't seen Georgia cover the spread before an off week, in the game before an off week, and any other time in the Kirby Smart era. They lost twice outright prior to bye weeks in the previous years under Smart. They did that with flying colors there on Saturday. So Georgia looked really, really sharp, really, really focused when there was plenty of opportunity to have your attention on Knoxville, Tennessee. They were squarely focused on the Vanderbilt Commodores, and they made the game look even easier than it was supposed to. So I would say that Georgia's pretty close to firing on all cylinders. There are 2 things for me that are missing right now. I want to see more pass rush. I just think they got to try to find it. And the second thing here is they're a little bit banged up. And I'm not going to use injuries as an excuse because I'm not, Alabama. This is not a rebuilding year for Georgia. It is go for 2, 22. Go for 2 in 22. Go for 2 in 22. That is the full focus of our mission here right now. A lot of 2 fingers in the air for me in Athens on Saturday. A lot of Georgia fans on the same wavelength here. But when you think about being in playoff mode right now, I don't know it's going to be like this sort of magic button that Georgia can push and just get everybody back healthy, ready to go versus Florida. Jalen Carter is the name I'm thinking about most prominently here. I don't know how close Carter is right now. And the very best playoff mode version of Georgia, to use your phrase, which I think is a good one, the very best playoff mode version of Georgia includes Jalen Carter, and I just don't know how close Carter is. So that's where I am on this. I want to see more pass rush. Want to see this team get just a little bit healthier, and Carter would obviously be a huge one. And you're not hearing much on Jalen getting healthy yet. Not saying that he's not, but you're just not hearing that yet. So that's kind of mentally kind of where my mind is on that. Let me try DawgNation.com again. I can't get these DawgNation comments to load. All right, let me try this again, see if I can get in here and get some more DawgNation.com comments. Y'all may have to pardon me while I delay myself here just a bit. All right. Here we go. Jesse Dellinger says, I was in Columbus, Ohio this weekend wearing the G proudly. Boy, a lot of comments rolling in here. So Jesse was up there doing that. That's fun to see. Senior Dog 54 says the majority of our preferred walk-ons are Hope Scholarship guys. They also get meals and $3,000 per semester. It's not a bad deal. That is a good point, that there's just a lot of ways to pay for school right now. And like prior to like NIL, players were actually making more money than you probably think they were, especially given the fact that their overhead costs aren't very high. And I'm not anti-NIL. I'm just saying that guys had more folding money than you probably think. A lot of them get the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant's a few $1,000s. I mean, that's not necessarily bad money when it's all for like, your own personal expenditures. Let's see what else. Gary McConnell says, any reasonable price tickets for the Georgia-Tennessee game? Stafford Square Dog says that's a good joke to start the day. Yeah, right now tickets pretty crazy. I think get-in price is about $400 right now. Randy Hall likes the idea of Georgia being Pug Nation on the heels of the Puglisi commitment. That's good. Matt Rukavina says the Tennessee win would mean cracks in the Bama foundation. He said that on Friday. It appears that may be some truth to that here right now. JP says we just got to get healthy. Getting Carter, Mondon, Mitchell back will be huge. Those are big names. Craig Jones says, how's Ladd doing after Saturday? Notice the tight end show shifted from Brock to Darnell. Also good to see. Hope that Eric got in the game. Hoping for positive things from all those guys in the next 2 weeks. He says glad that Eric got in the game. Yeah, go back to Saturday's post-game show. We talked to Terrence Edwards a lot about the day for Rick Gilbert. That was great to see. And, the Ladd McConkey injury, I don't have anything new for you on that. Smart kind of downplayed it after the game, but he'll speak again, I believe, on Tuesday night. So it'll be again a few days before we hear anything too new on Ladd McConkey. And what we do here may not be all that forthcoming. Sometimes that's the way it goes when it comes to these injury situations. JP also mentioning something that somebody else said, the Kentucky game being tricky for Tennessee. He says it's in Knoxville, but Kentucky plays defense, runs the ball, had a nail-biter last year. So we'll see if there's an emotional letdown for Tennessee. That's a fair question. J-Bob says he thought that Stat lost his edge in the third quarter. I thought Stetson Bennett had a very good day. I really did. I got no issue with Bennett after Saturday at all. Dogs on Top mentioning that he thinks that Georgia should play the Chicken Fried song by Zach Brown Band. I've sort of thought this before, too, that could be Georgia's version of Dixieland Delight. Now, you'd have to have somebody figure out a way to make it, crass and profane the way the Bama fans have with Dixieland Delight. But if Georgia had its sort of like song like that, I do think the Chicken Fried would probably be the best example of that. It's funny that you bring that up because I've thought, honestly, the same thing before. Hemingway says he thought Carson Beck looked way better now than he did a year ago. Clearly, he's showing some growth as a veteran now in the program. 3 years of college experience, even if it's mostly in a backup role, has some value to it. And pretty obviously, he's demonstrating that. Randy Glass says Bama's desire to move focus from the trenches to a full-out air raid philosophy was a fatal error, starting to see the cracks in their getting bigger. I agree with Randy on this, and we've said this many times before, that Alabama overestimated the amount to which college football was changing. Nick Saban was very proud for a long time. You're not going to win anything playing defense, running the football. That's what he said before. And if anything, that's why Alabama lost it last year, their inability to keep pace with the physicality of the game. Because throwing the football, and you've heard me say this, throwing the football comes down to two things. It is scheme and skill. And that's all fine and well as long as you have the superior scheme and the better skilled players. But if you ever run up against a team that has better scheme, and I believe that Josh Heupel is better at that than what Alabama currently is, and Tennessee's wide receivers are more skilled than Alabama's wide receivers currently are, Hooker, Young, I'd probably take a healthy Bryce Young over Hendon Hooker, but Hooker's clearly good enough to get the job done with the receivers he's working with. All of a sudden, the thing that Alabama has made the hallmark of its program, they ran into Saturday someone who has better skill, someone who has better scheme. And in those moments, you better be able to physically move your opponent, because that is not quite such a fluctuating situation. If you're the better physical team, if you're the better defensive team, if you're just more dominant along the line of scrimmage, you can kind of count on that week to week, and you have a chance of making the game be about what you want it to be about. That's what it is against Georgia-Tennessee. It is a clash of styles. Tennessee wants it to be a basketball game. Georgia wants it to be a fist fight. And Alabama is just not capable of asserting itself that way right now. Their only choice was to try to win the game playing Tennessee's way, and they don't play that way right now as well as Tennessee does. And so they were susceptible to losing, and they did. And I think Randy brings up a great point. Stafford Square Dog says that Hendon Hooker's got twice as many touchdowns as Stetson does. Yeah, listen, I think that Hendon Hooker's a great quarterback right now. I think that Hooker's probably second in the Heisman race right now. Probably C.J. Stroud 1, Hendon Hooker 2. Maybe Hooker actually wins the award. If it comes down to Georgia trying to beat Tennessee 52-49, they're not going to do it. I don't deny that. I don't deny that at all. But I have a lot of faith in Georgia about not making it that kind of game. And I have a lot of faith in Georgia about being able to score enough to keep pace. That Georgia, can't win if it gives up 40 to Tennessee, but it also probably can't win unless it scores 30. And I have faith in Georgia to be able to do both of those things. And that's not an official pick for me right now. I'm not ready to do that yet. But in terms of the kind of game that Georgia needs to win, where you have a lot of offense and a whole lot of defense, then yeah, I think that Georgia might be able to do that. All right, final comments, and we got to go. Back on Facebook just for a moment. Let's see if we can get some more comments to populate here. All right. Philip Jordan Wells says, got to say this, Trouble Davis looks better out there than he's been given credit for. Philip, I think you're right about that. Georgia has really needed his contribution and gotten a good one from him. Greg Childer says, has Hooker ever been in an unfriendly environment yet or been popped a few times? Nope. Well, Greg, I think you and I are on the same page on this. That's what Georgia's got to do. Georgia fans got to make the stadium a house of horrors. I believe they will. Biggest atmosphere, I believe, of all time. And Georgia's got to really get after him from a pass pressure standpoint. I think you're right about that. Emery Waller gives you go, Dogs. Appreciate that. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina, I'm not reading that one. Denise White-Loper also brings up a good point that everybody's got the same problem, that they don't have the depth that Georgia has. And what you hope is come November, depth matters more. I think it probably does. And you also hope that the Georgia depth is what we think it can be. I think that's probably true there too. All right, back on YouTube for the final time, then we're going to get off the air for today. All right. Jonathan Aaron says it's my search history that's messing up the YouTube chat. I don't believe that's the case. I don't think that's the case. Buddy Lee Z says, what's my favorite thing about this team so far? I think it is the way in which they do seem to enjoy playing with each other, that somehow, some way, the 2021 team had an intangible characteristic that was equal to or in excess of its physical characteristics. They just seem to have a little bit of a special thing about them. And when you do see future NFL stars blocking for their teammates, when you do see big celebrations after touchdowns, when Gilbert scored his touchdown on Saturday and the entire team almost did like a 2007 Florida, rushed the field to celebrate that, that does mean something to me. Now, listen, your level of connection can't overcome if you're just playing a better team. But if you got two really talented teams battling each other and one team feels very close to each other, one team feels very connected to each other, I do think that could be the differentiator. And frankly, I do believe it's hard to create that if you've got a million transfers. It really is. If so-and-so played for Georgia last year and so-and-so played for Tech last year and so-and-so played for LSU last year and so-and-so played for Louisville last year, and you try to put all those guys in the same team, good luck, getting them to view each other as some sort of brotherhood when they haven't been together more than 5 minutes. I'm just being as candid as I know how to be. In Georgia right now, Kirby preaches that connected part of this, and I don't think that's BS. I really don't. I think this team has it. I think it's probably good to have it. And thus far, I feel like I see that they really, sometimes they don't quite create the hierarchy of touches on offense that I wish they would. But the fact that they are a little bit more egalitarian with that might actually make the team vibe a little stronger. And right now, that's a really fun thing to like about this team, is that once again, even though sometimes I think it sort of should be about some players more than others, once again, it really just isn't about any one guy. Like, their best player's not playing. Jalen Carter's their best player. He's not playing. And yet somehow this team is just still banded together. I believe that's my favorite thing about them right now. I do. Anything else? Scott McFadden loved seeing Jordan Davis last night on Sunday Night Football. It was great to see. I watched some of that game. James F. says UGA is going to have enough defensive stops to control clock and score points. Look at the time of possession. That's a dog game plan in a nutshell. Doesn't matter to the opponent. That's true. I would say it's even more true against a team like Tennessee that can punish you so much for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And listen, we said this going into the Tennessee game last year, that I actually had some respect for Tennessee before last year's game. Georgia actually dominated in Knoxville more than I expected them to. But what we also saw is that the Tennessee had its shot at making some big plays in last year's game. That the team, the fans, you can't get too up or down based on one moment from a game. A team like Tennessee is going to strike you a couple of times, but you got to come back and strike them even harder. And Kirby Smart's used that exact phrase. You've got to come back and strike them even harder, and you've got to have your moments in excess of the moments they're able to have. It's one of the things about college football that makes it so much fun is contrasting styles, and everybody's trying to do their thing better. And as our commenter laid out, that's kind of what the recipe for Georgia would be in a game like that, or really any game of any magnitude that Georgia's going to play over the course of the rest of the time. So we're going to shut up for now and say goodbye to you. Check out the AJC online, ajc.com. You want the aftermath of an awful playoff stretch for the Braves coming to a end, Philadelphia, and for now, I guess, muting the celebration of outlasting the Mets in the National League East. You can get that online. Better news for the Falcons. You can find that there too. And the rest of the landscape in the sports world. Obviously, a lot going on in politics there as well. We don't talk about that, but there's certainly plenty to be seen and know in that arena, and you can find that out online, ajc.com there as well. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on that today. And we'll see all of you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll talk to you then.